Hello there and welcome to this Meanwhile Elsewhere on changing ideas in the Renaissance. In this video we're going to talk about Nicolas Copernicus, Ferdinand Magellan and Sofonisba Anguissola. So the Renaissance describes a period of time in the 15th and 16th centuries when lots of new ideas around science and learning developed. Now the new ideas developed because the printing press allowed more books to be written, and this helped new ideas to spread. Technological improvements in navigation and shipbuilding allowed more travel, trade and new ideas to spread. Wealth and growth in Italian cities like Florence, Venice and Milan provided money to fund new artworks and scholars, and new religious ideas led to a decline in the Catholic Church and the traditional social order, allowing new ideas to develop. Now these are the main historical concepts in this learning. Astronomy is the study of the universe, including the sun, the planet and the stars. Circumnavigation is to navigate all the way around the world. Heliocentric theory is the theory that the sun, and not as previously thought the earth, was the centre of the universe and the earth and planets moved around it. Navigation is knowing your location and which routes to take. And Renaissance, the time in the 15th and 16th century when new ideas about science were discovered, it was often known as the rebirth of learning. So we're going to find out about three individuals. The first one we're going to find out about is Nicolas Copernicus. Now Copernicus was born in 1473 in the town of Torun to German-speaking parents in Royal Prussia in the Kingdom of Poland. His father was a merchant and a local official. His father died when he was only 10 and Nicolas expected to become a merchant himself. His name Copernicus came from the copper trade. Now Nicolas's uncle ensured he had a good education and he studied arithmetic, geometry and astronomy. And in 1491 Nicolas went to university in Krakow. He studied humanities, theology, logic, poetry, rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion, philosophy and mathematical astronomy. And you can see there a map of the Kingdom of Poland in the 15th century. Now Copernicus began to develop an interest in the stars. He bought star tables for calculating the exact position of the stars, and in 1496 he went to the University of Bologna in Italy. Now Nicolas's uncle wanted him to become a canon, which is a senior church official. In Bologna, though, Nicolas lodged with Domenico Maria de Novara, who was a famous astronomy professor. And he inspired Nicolas Copernicus. He encouraged his interest in astronomy. Novara challenged the traditional view of astronomers that the Earth was fixed and other planets and the sun moved around the Earth. So this is an example, of course, of new thinking. Now in 1501, Nicolas stayed in Italy to train as a doctor at the University of Padua. Here he learned to let blood with leeches and watch the dissection of corpses. Now, Nicolas continued to be fascinated by astronomy, asking himself questions such as, what if the Earth turns? What if the Earth circles around the sun? He was challenging existing theories and ideas about astronomy. Now, Nicolas realised that the stars that can be seen in the night sky were much further away than people previously had believed. He came up with a theory that the Earth and Sun were actually relatively close to each other and began to believe that the Earth went round the Sun. Now, it would take years of mathematical calculations for Nicolas to prove his ideas, but in the end he would. And this was a really important development in improving scientific understanding and our knowledge of astronomy. Now in August 1521, Nicolas saw the moon dip into the Earth's shadow and he noted the time precisely at 2:48 AM. He had witnessed a lunar eclipse. He realised he could use this to measure distances of stars and planets from the sun and moon. In 1529, Nicolas made the last observation to go into his book, which would be called On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. The central idea of the book was that the Earth rotates daily on its axis and revolves yearly around the Sun. This challenged the long-held view that the Earth was stationary at the centre of the universe. Nicolas finally published his book in early 1543, dying on the 24th of May 1543. Now Copernicus' work was really important in creating new scientific discoveries. His theory that the sun is at the centre of the solar system with the planets moving around it is called the heliocentric model, which is more accurate than other theories before it. What was really crucial though was that his methods of using careful scientific observation paved the way for other Renaissance scientists, people like Galileo Galilei for example, to make even more discoveries. And you can see here there's the statue at the University of Krakow in Poland which honours Nicolas Copernicus. So the next person we're going to find out about is the explorer Ferdinand Magellan. Now, Magellan was born in 1480 to a minor nobility family in Portugal. His parents died when he was still a boy, and he went to live in Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. In 1505, Magellan enlisted into a Portuguese fleet and went on expeditions to India and Africa. In 1511, he was with the fleet that conquered Malacca on the Malay Peninsula, gaining control of important trade routes. He also explored the islands of present-day Indonesia as far east as the Moluccas, also known as the Spice Islands. In 1512, Magellan returned to Lisbon, and in 1513 he was wounded during an expedition to Morocco, which left him with a permanent limp. In 1517 he fell out with the Portuguese king, and he went to see Charles I, the Spanish king, to ask him to support a new expedition to the Moluccas by sailing westwards. The Spanish wanted a share in the valuable spice trade, but the Portuguese, well, they controlled the eastward routes around South Africa. So it was about the expedition was all about, Magellan's expedition was all about going west and finding a new route to what was known at the time as the East Indies. And we'll look at a map in just a moment. So Magellan was successful, and in 1519 he set out on an expedition with 5 vessels. In spite of an often rebellious crew, rough weather and scurvy, which is a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, and a lack of food, Magellan managed to cross the Atlantic, a really incredible achievement. And Magellan navigated through the southern point of South America, which were later named the Straits of Magellan in honour of him, and you can see that on the map there. Now, with only 3 ships left, Magellan sailed on to the Pacific with rapidly diminishing supplies. This led to many of the crew dying of starvation and of scurvy. So after about 14 weeks, the expedition reached an island, which is probably Guam in the Western Pacific, and then they then sailed on to the Philippines. Now, on the 27th of April 1521, Magellan was actually killed after becoming involved in a battle between 2 rival local chieftains. One ship, though, from the fleet eventually reached Spain in September 1522, and this was the very first time that a circumnavigation of the globe had been completed. Between 1577 and 1580, Francis Drake became the first Englishman to complete a circumnavigation in his ship, the Golden Hind. Okay, so you can see here a full map of the route that you can see how they left Spain, sort of went across the Atlantic Ocean, around the South America, and finding the Straits of Magellan to link the Atlantic and the Pacific, and that was a really, really significant discovery that was made by Magellan. It went across the Pacific Ocean, around what's now Indonesia, through the sort of southern kind of end of the Indian Ocean, around what was called the Cape of Good Hope, around the continent of Africa, and back to Spain. This was the first ever circumnavigation, and even though Magellan himself didn't manage to survive the voyage and complete it, he was responsible for the first ever circumnavigation. And as we said, this wasn't going to be achieved by an Englishman until 1577 to 1580, when Francis Drake did it, for very different reasons actually. Okay, so one of the features of the Renaissance was the artwork in the Renaissance, and we are now going to tell the story of Sofonisba Anguissola, who was an Italian noblewoman who was born during the Renaissance in Cremona in northern Italy. She studied music, science, Latin and Greek, and at the age of 14, Sofonisba's father asked the artist Bernardino Campi to teach Sofonisba to paint. Now, she was a Renaissance artist, and art was beginning to change during this time. Artists were no longer portraying people in flat pictures, but as real, rounded and lifelike figures. Renaissance artists began to study anatomy and recreate muscles and veins in sculpture and on paper, and Sofonisba began to paint members of her own family. And this was a real change, because previously lots of art had involved kind of pictures of biblical images, but to be able to paint sort of more ordinary depictions of life was a key change in the Renaissance, and also a great historical source for us. Now, Master Campi, Bernardino Campi, encouraged Sofonisba to experiment with colour, and she began to make money by selling her paintings. Now, in 1554, Sofonisba travelled to Rome. Now, at the time of the Renaissance, Rome, an Italian city-state, it was a city of both old and new buildings. Now, the Italian city-states like Rome, Venice, Florence, and Milan were key to the Renaissance. Many Renaissance artists came to Rome to paint the buildings from sort of Roman times, like the Colosseum, for example. Now, in Rome, Sofonisba met the 79-year-old artist Michelangelo. Now, Michelangelo had used the laws of perspective to make figures in his paintings seem real. He painted some of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Now in 1554, Michelangelo challenged Sofonisba to draw a really difficult subject, a crying boy. Under his guidance, Sofonisba began using new techniques and created this painting, which you can see here, which is a very famous painting by Sofonisba Anguissola, and she called this painting Astrobale bitten by a crayfish. And some of the techniques you can see here were really revolutionary at the time. You can also see a picture of the very famous, beautiful Sistine Chapel ceiling, which can be found in the Vatican museums now in Rome, and there's a picture of Michelangelo as well. Okay, so by 1558, which is the year Queen Elizabeth I came to the throne in England, Sofonisba travelled to Milan. There, Sofonisba was invited to paint a portrait of the Duke of Alba, who was an advisor to King Philip II of Spain. Sofonisba was then invited to the Spanish court in Madrid. Now, in Madrid, Sofonisba began teaching Philip II's new wife, Elizabeth of Valois, to paint. They became friends, and Sofonisba painted pictures of the gold, silver, and treasures which had been brought to Spain at this time from his empire. Now, in 1571, Sofonisba married a Sicilian nobleman, but he died a few years later, and in 1584 she fell in love with and married a sea captain. Sofonisba died in 1625 at the age of 93. Now here you can see a self-portrait by Sofonisba Anguissola from 1610 when she was around 78. Okay, so what about a legacy of Sofonisba Anguissola? Well, her work had a lasting impact on generations of artists. Her portrait of Queen Elizabeth of Valois was widely copied by many artists. Sofonisba's work also opened the way for larger numbers of women to pursue careers as artists. Her work reflected the importance of Renaissance artists for helping art become just more representative of life. Artists began to focus less on biblical scenes and began to include portraits and events from everyday life, like her famous painting, The Chess Game. Now that's really important for history and our understanding of culture. From the 16th century, we can really begin to know exactly what people in the past looked like and get an even richer sense for what their lives were like. And there you can see Sofonisba's painting called The Chess Game, which depicts her sisters playing chess, and is certainly one of my favourite of all of her artworks. Okay, so thanks very much for listening to the Changing Ideas of the Renaissance. We've looked at three individuals there, Nicolas Copernicus, Ferdinand Magellan and Sofonisba Anguissola, to think about changing ideas, more science, more exploration and much more representative and improved artwork were key consequences and impacts of the Renaissance in the 16th century. And that obviously, coupled with the new religious ideas at the time, made this a real time of great change in history. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.